Alright, another draft physics, draft science here on YouTube video presentation. I shouldn't have to tell you what channel you're listening to, should I? Not hardly. Anyway, comments mostly, but there'll obviously be some other extension of the conversation. Can you do a video explaining radio TV recording playback of sound in the simplest way possible? Possible ways. No. It's a simple answer. I mean, it depends on how much you want to know, right? So the simple way of explaining the more detailed process or the simplest process. I mean, the simplest explanation is that you create an oscillator of some kind, a water wheel, okay, that a duck flies off the top of it. And then when a duck loses a feather. Every time it goes around the top, a feather falls off. And then the feather hits a scale, and the scale goes in and bends down, and that causes another thing to, Rube Goldberg. And finally you get to the antenna, and the antenna ends up wobbling based on how often a feather hits the scale, right? And the wobble, I'm going to call it that. We could call it a vibration, or you could call it a frequency. It doesn't really matter. I think to be closer to the truth, you say frequency. There's an oscillating frequency, and it starts with something oscillating. The water wheel, the duck. And then when the antenna vibrates, essentially that means that the antenna is getting fat, getting thin, getting fat, getting thin. That is, pressure's going into the antenna. The pressure expands the antenna. The antenna says, fuck you, I don't like being expanded. There's no need for me to be expanded. My natural state is something else, and it goes back to its natural state. And when it does that, it causes a vibration in what the common dissident would call the ether, and what conventional science would call, the unether, the bent space, the field. All right, so I would argue that no, what's really happening is that there's little quanta of energy bits, little photons, and those little photons are what happens when electrons move. When electrons go this way, when they're accelerated, their direction is changed, and more velocity is added. It means they give back something to the world. Every time one guy jumps in their little boat, another guy jumps out. So when the electron went out a little bit, when the antenna's being pressurized, it went back in again, and when it went back in again, it shot a photon going the opposite way. A little piece of energy, a little asteroid, whatever you want to call it. And because you're oscillating based on the consistent pattern of the wheel turning at the consistent rate, the little bits of energy coming out of the antenna will be at exactly the same frequency. Little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit. Because at the same exact time, all the atoms are going fat, which means the electrons go out, and then they go back in again. And when they go back in again, when they reverse direction, say they go this way, and there's no energy to support that. There's drag, because now they're going this way, they're hitting more stuff going the opposite way. So more boat jumpers, more rowers jump in the opposite way, and it gives back the rower going the opposite direction, and that's the photon. So the little photons are built that way by the antenna. Now, theoretically, if you could make a 1 billion, I don't know what in gigahertz, I don't know what a photon of light, visible light is, but it's probably like 1 billion gigahertz. So if you could make a water wheel that turned at 1 billion gigahertz, theoretically you could make a radio antenna light up, theoretically. Because they're just little bits, and you're sending them at a frequency. And so the frequency is a radio signal of 200 megahertz is how far apart they are. So that would be a certain number of meters. It would be measured in is the distance between the little bits flying off the antenna. And it's just that distance that decides what the radio frequency or pattern is. And so for TV, it's much higher. For radio, it's much lower. And all you did to make the TV picture, or the information you put on, the voice, is when you talked at the water wheel would slow down or speed up based on the tone of your voice. So if it's high pitch, it would make the water wheel turn faster. If it was low pitch, it would turn slower. So you put the information into the frequency, that's FM, and if you just put it in the amplitude, it would mean that more feathers are falling off the duck. So you're yelling at the duck, and by yelling at the duck, you knock more feathers off each time. But either way, you get the information into the signal. The signal travels to another antenna. The other antenna is just minding its own business, and all of a sudden all these little asteroids hit it. Or if you're an etherist, the magical field goes blah, 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 at the same frequency, and it causes the new antenna to vibrate at the same synchrony, in a sense, get fat and thin again. So you're moving the electrons again. So you're pushing them in. There is a reflection that goes back to the source, but nobody pays any attention to that. And when the antenna expands, and when it contracts again, okay, it's going to create a voltage because the atoms are now changing size inside the antenna. They're going fat to thin. That means they're going positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. And they're creating a voltage that you can read if you have an instrument capable of it. Because it's a pressure, and the pressure goes through the wire to your instrument that's measuring the pressure. Now, if you want to record it, then you can record it on a piece of paper as a bunch of little jagged lines, like a, or you can record it as burns in the paper, or lots of ways of recording the information. Or you could record it on a piece of tape that's magnetically sensitive, and each time you do it, it changes the magnetism from plus to minus, plus to minus, plus to minus. So you're just recording the frequency, and then you have some other instrument that can record, that can read what you recorded, and you just play it back, and you just create a new water wheel that throws a duck feather off, and or sound, or whatever you want to create. So that's a simple explanation. Now, is it detailed enough? I don't know. Is it too long an explanation? Too complex? Deals with too many complex subjects in too simple a way? I mean, rowers jumping in boats. Yeah, that needs a context probably. So, the simplest possible way, who knows what that is? Sorry, I can draw a picture later maybe. Maybe at the end of the video I'll do some more conversation about this, because really there has been no theory that's rational explaining virtual photons and their performance, or perturbations in the ether. Well, I'll explain it. Alright, so this was a funny comment. I don't think God likes people doing that. He made a perfectly good word for you, Y-O-U. Doesn't like you doing this you stuff. Believe in God, with extra space there for no good reason. Duh. I mean, exactly. How many videos could this guy possibly watch to have the impression I'm a God botherer? Or anything close to a God botherer? I mean, it really shouldn't take any time at all. Alright. So this is at Do Not God. So he must have commented saying, "You're a dumb fuck." Somebody using my name or something. Oh, okay. At Do Not God. Okay, so he's doing the stupid Twitter thing. I don't have a Twitter account. Is GM's. So GM is going to just confuse this guy. You should say GS Nick. See, you people really just couldn't. You don't want to, no space after the comma. I mean, just, wow, you really just don't care. Figure it out. So I'd have to figure out what you just typed, which is annoying. So is that a yes or a no? So he couldn't figure out that this guy's being pretty sarcastic and pointing out that obviously I'm not a God botherer. Obviously. Let's see. So then he feels the need somebody to comment back again. So Thinking Clearly 2 pops in. And this is the first video of DraftScience or Minimum you've ever watched. You have to be taking the piss. Yes, English phrase. I mean, just jerking off on the, you're just, it's not even piss. You're just having a wank here for fun or something. Look how big, stupid, and ugly my penis is, or something like that. Wait, do you think? What? Wait, do you think? Oh, you think that's the same stance? Yes, I think it is. I think do not God is a clear statement that I think God is a really dumb idea. If I think you shouldn't do it, I'm probably not one of them, idiot. Sorry, well, let me clear this up. Go fuck yourself. So this is, who would ask the question but some kind of silly God botherer, right? I don't even understand how somebody could be this fucking stupid. And then he says, go fuck yourself. What the fuck? These commenters really, some of them are just so stupid. Try writing a coherent sentence, you dumb fuck. Alright, Janet chimes in. Robin here, so she has a she has a screen name Janet Williams and calls herself Robin. I mean, there's just no help. Ferrous iron. Oh, so she's not even going to be on the subject of God bothering. So she apparently was reading this thread and decided to comment on my video in this thread. Ah, really good. The ferrous iron in my caudate nucleus. So again, just because we have iron in our bodies means what? Something special, something, wow, oh, that's so incredible. Clearly, early organisms, where we earlier developed from, needed to know north and south. That could be valuable information in terms of their movement, to have a reference point. So they wouldn't end up going to the same place all the time. They go different locations to eat or something. So there was a incentive for the robot to have some sense of direction. So clearly, having little compasses built into the system inside of our cells makes perfectly good sense. Anyway, it's not feral as in cats. So this is the kind of stuff you waste time on with double periods for whatever that is. Yes, sometimes I'll say words the way I say them. Now, they're clearly understandable in the context. Nobody could misunderstand and think I was talking about feral cats. So again, this is just such little baby bullshit. It is large and stable. I don't know what that means. You think so, do you? Anyway, can you explain what feral cells are? Doesn't really, they call them feral cells. That's what they call them. They don't really say ferrous cells. So they say a ferro cell. That's how it's titled. It's not my fault. That's how they title it. Ferro. Are you cells are that you mention frequently? No, because they're responses to things. I don't really think I have to go over it. If you're interested, you'll watch the other videos, the Ken Wheeler response videos. If you're not interested, then just pretend you don't care. I have no interest in what my family originated from North Jersey is doing, except that I am tired. I don't know, very tired from them. As I said before, I am nothing like them. Wow. Sorry, not even close to understanding where you're going. What the fuck your brain's busy with. So then she says again, as you are tired of people explaining physics. So again, I'll just block you, right? Because clearly people aren't explaining physics. They're explaining their delusions. They're explaining what their imagination pops up with that has no real relevance to the actual evidence, as I've pointed out. That you do not know physics. So, as you are tired of people explaining physics that do not know physics. Right. Okay, so that sentence is alright, sorry. That is exactly how I feel about munchkins. Well, whatever. Who cares? Hope the weather back there is good. I mean, gee, it's too much trouble to even delete this stuff. But I mean, it just deserves deletion, right? Yeah, it does. This is just silly crap. I mean, you're in the wrong thread, and you're not making any sense. As you're tired of people explaining physics that do not know physics, like the physicists, that is exactly how. See, it just doesn't. So what? That's not helpful in any way whatsoever. Hope the weather back there is good. for getting out. See, this is just so irrelevant. Sure, I'm glad I resemble a dipole rather than a monopole. So what does this have to do with anything? The monopole looks like a dense Hershey's Kiss pile of poo, and the dipole is light and spherical. Wow. No, it really isn't. So, you got it backwards, clearly. I looked up the difference between dipole and monopoly. Well, that's funny. I mean, the fact that monopole isn't a word isn't my fault. I mean, it's a real thing. It shouldn't even need a hyphen. But anyway. And the illustrations were hilarious. LOLOL. I think I will just block you because I don't think you'll ever make a reasonable contribution. So just fuck off. Alright. So just made a mess in already stupid conversation made stupider. Yeah. Oh, thinking clearly too, who has been kind of annoying. Let's see what he. So he's going to talk about dreams. See, he really does love not talking about physics, and instead, just because I spent a little tiny bit of time with a personal anecdote, he has to, you know. I had about a 5-year period where I was flying in every dream I could remember, but many ended bouncing over a crumbling city, sinking into the sea, and would eventually run out of places to land. Yeah, well, it didn't matter if I had a place to land. The point was, yeah, I always had the wrong speed coming into the landing, or the wrong angle coming into the landing. So it was never a nice 3-point landing. Like you, I love the flying part. About 3 years ago, they just stopped, and I do miss it. How strange the mind is. Yes. Probably not all that strange. But anyway. Maybe there were flying squirrels in our ancestry somewhere or something. Who knows? Right, so I guess I'm done with the comments, which is really disappointing. There's not one comment relevant to the subject. I mean, in the last couple of videos, I've basically explained to you the creation of photons. I've given you a rational explanation for how pressure exists in atoms, how that pressure is converted into what we call something we can know a photon, and we can understand that there's photons that are in these invisible spectrums, and you know, they're just like the ones we can see, but they're just not visible, you know, but they're just as substantial, let's say. I've for the first time ever, to quote Ken Wheeler, I've given you a reasonable and sensible explanation for their creation, and not one comment on the subject. I mean, that's just it's all I can do is yeah. I mean, it's just, is there really any point with human beings? I mean, is there any hope at all? Do people can? I don't know. It's just yeah, sorry. It's just very discouraging. Plainly, it's very discouraging. Alright, so maybe I'll just put some of this text stuff back up. Oh no, maybe yeah, that's right. We have videos we could respond to. So, the Scientific Lee guy does some interesting ferro cell type experiments, okay? So, he's got little lights that he puts inside of the lights, and so, you know, it's still a plain piece of glass with the liquid in between the two layers, and so you're just seeing where light reflects. So you're seeing refraction angles, and that's all that's really happening. And the field lines are a complete, these lines, the curved lines, are a complete illusion. There's nothing shaped that way. Everything's shaped in these straight lines, and it just happens to be that the material at different angles reflects, and so you're seeing different pieces of different lines, and so it looks like a curved line you're seeing, but there's no curve anywhere. It's all just straight rays, and you're just seeing an arc based on angle of reflection. So for the light to get to your eye, it has to take a certain path, and the path is what's confusing you, because it's made of a bunch of photons, not one beam of light, a ray of light. but there's no bending of anything real. Nothing real was bent in this experiment. So anyway, let's see what it is. Proving God is real. I really do have to just unsubscribe because he's just too full of this God crap. Physics for God. If God wants you to know physics, why didn't he put it in the Bible, retard? I mean...
I customized and saved with Liberty Mutual. Any other changes are purely coincidental.
Saving money with Groupon is
crazy. Oh, really?
Simple.
Disgusting. So God wants this. God wants you to put this crap on his videos. He chose to put commercials on a God video. Proving God is real with commercial interruptions. So I'm supposed to believe you have any sincere devotion to your God when you put commercials on his videos, the videos you're making in his name? Ooh. If I was God, yeah, I think you would be smited.
Appointments, even when my hands are busy. Now, some
gross.
people gonna like this commercial for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I know, they're the right reasons, bitch.
This is the magnetic field that everybody is going to. This is the magnetic field that is taught in schools, colleges,
right, so you're disproving the magnetic field. So you're just trying to say there is no field. It doesn't matter what the interpretation is. We all have an idea that there's something. Okay? And you're trying to claim there's nothing. Well, there's clearly something that magnets create, and it clearly happens in a field-like manner. So debunking the field is idiotic. What you have to do is say you have a better explanation of what the field is made of. But there's clearly a field, shithead, of something.
Universities. It is called a reciprocating field, which means it goes from north to south.
Well, that's not what it means, but fine, it's polarized. Reciprocating? No.
What if I said it doesn't do that?
Yes, I would claim it doesn't do that either, but I wouldn't say there's no field in doing that.
What if I said this field, which is 150 years old, which has been viewed using iron filings by...
Yes, you're not viewing the field with the iron filings. Again, you're not viewing the force, lines of force. You're viewing their consequence on a magnet. You're seeing what a dipole magnet does to a dipole magnet. You're not seeing what the field is actually doing.
Science.
Because the field is made of two different fields, the north field and the south field. Corn and wheat. Something like that.
What if this is wrong? If I could prove that the magnetic field doesn't do this, surely that would...
Yes. Well, let's get on to the proof. Thank you. I would enjoy that.
Aid science, especially now that we are making electromagnetic tweezers for moving atoms and molecules around. And yes, those kind of things do work. But if this magnetic field...
Yeah, they don't work the way they say they work, though.
...is incorrect. All sciences must change because all atoms are electromagnetic. And so...
Well, everybody knows that, right? So that doesn't even mean anything. Electromagnetic. I mean, it just doesn't. It's not a rational combination of words, in my opinion. Everything is charge-based. So again, I'll say this again, right? This is another point I made to you that it is. And it's just fucking brilliant. And somebody should point out how brilliant it is, because I'm clearing up all the mush, the confusion. And it was all because of the Maxwell analogy, right? Because if you really start where Maxwell started, you start with charge. Charge is the elemental function, okay? And the difference between an electron and a proton as charged elements is a perfect illustration of what's happening on the elemental level, right? There's the charge right there at the elemental level. Charge exists. So you can charge big objects, but the only reason why a big object is charged is because it's changing the elemental bits, and it's obviously changing electrons and protons in some way, their relationship to each other, so the object appears to be more electron or appears to be more proton. And so clearly charge is the fundamental elemental function. A dipole, a magnet, is just taking two charges and putting them very, very close together. And now you have a little magnet. And then you put a bunch of little magnets together, you have a big magnet. So clearly charge is making magnets. And clearly in electricity, well, that only happens in conductors. And what's happening is the electrons are exchanging their pressure. One's got more motion in it, out. And this one feels that because they bang into each other, so to speak. They come in proximity to each other, and just like two bodies would feel the gravity, they feel the repulsive pressure of their sameness, in the sense they reflect energy back and forth, and essentially communicate pressure. So if I'm under more pressure and you come into the room, my pressure is radiating, and you'll feel it, and you'll pressurize. And when you do that, you'll be absorbing my pressure. All right.
The principle behind the theory has now changed because the theory's changed, and because physics is the basis of all matter. Anything to do with matter.
So this is just some sort of weird premise that somehow if I expand your understanding of one thing, I've expanded your understanding of everything in the universe, which is silly. I can't find output. That's what I need here. This computer doesn't quite have a volume increaser that I can get to easily, so that should help.
Would then have to be reevaluated to bring in this new correct knowledge. So this is the field that is believed to be in everything.
Thank you for getting to the point.
Magnetic fields are produced by electric currents.
So they're produced also by magnets and moving a magnet. And so magnets make this stuff too. But anyway, you don't need electricity.
Current in a wire, a loop of wire, a solenoid, a rare earth bar magnet, or the earth, or atoms. Their magnetic fields are produced by electric currents inside.
So again, I would argue that obviously that manifestation, though, can be emphasized by doing certain things like curling the wire. And as again I pointed out, no one's ever given a rational explanation why coiling the wire makes more magnetism. And I've explained it to you, right? The coil is the wires basically radiating. If you force the radiation to hit each other, so if I'm radiating, you're radiating, if I put us in proximity or facing each other, well then our radiation will hit each other. Okay, I'm going to magnify the effect of that radiation because it's trapped now inside the coil, going back and forth, hitting each other. But if we don't face each other, then it just goes into space.
Which can be macroscopic currents in wires or microscopic currents associated with electrons in atomic orbits.
Yes, well the only thing clearly electrical. Okay, so it goes from charge becomes electric when charge goes through a conductor. That's it. That's when you have this, like say if I charge a Vendigraph to 250,000 volts. The only way it has an electrical component is when I allow the atmosphere or some other element to leak that charge, to leak that pressure through atoms, through a conductor. And it's always through a conductor. No conductor, no electro. Just charge. So understand, charge is the element. The charge universe. That's where you start.
Magnetic field
The charge-averse.
B is defined in terms of force on moving charge in the Lorentz force law. The interaction of magnetic field.
So you're not really disproving the magnetic field. You're just attempting a proof of some kind that somehow the equation they're using is fundamentally inaccurate in some fundamental way, which is going to be a little hard to prove because obviously the math works pretty well. It's wrong in the sense it's identified the wrong variables, but the wrongness isn't catastrophic because it's still, the E and the B are really just the same thing. So there's no E field and B field, there's just the C field, the charge.
Fields with charge leads to many practical applications. Magnetic field sources are essentially dipolar in nature, having a north and south magnetic pole. The S1 unit for magnetic field.
Yeah, again, so the north and south is just basically saying electron heavy or proton heavy. It's the same thing as charge and how you would identify electricity. So the north side of the magnet is associated with electron pressure, the south side with proton pressure. You're just basically saying which way will a dipole atom, an atom that has an electric bias, that is more electron pressure on one side than electron pressure on the other side, how will it react to a dipole field?
Field is the Tesla, which can be seen from the magnetic part of the Lorentz force law written below. So, all of these things react exactly the same.
So you haven't drawn any picture of anything. You haven't explained, well, here's a thing and this is what it's doing. So I've given you the pictures. I've shown you the two charges, the little electron, the little proton, creating an opposite and equal force, in the sense that the proton will reflect what the electron diverts, and the electron will reflect what the proton diverts.
When an electric current is put through them, they produce a reciprocating magnetic field from north to south.
So again, you're just saying you're disproving the field, so why are you talking about the field that you're supposed to be disproving? And again, you're drawing nothing.
This also includes the currents in a wire. So if I show that a magnetic field does not make a torus, then anybody who's an electrician out there, this of course will give you an added advantage.
Well, conventional physics doesn't say it makes a torus, so, you know, they're just implying it. But they'll clearly, like the guy I showed yesterday, he showed fluids moving, but then he said, this isn't what really happens. He did. He did say, never mind, what I just said is horseshit. It's just as close as I can analogize. So yeah, I mean, I could have analogized a horse to, like, a donkey, you know, or a wildebeest. But instead I chose to analogize a horse to a frog. But as long as I, you know, identify that there's bullfrogs and there's little tree frogs and there's different kinds of frogs, well, there's different kind of horses. So it's, you know, it fits, but it doesn't really fit. But anyway, but you're not doing, yeah, you're just, this is not useful.
For everybody else, because you would know why there was a torus around the line, and it's not because of a reciprocating magnetic field.
It's not because there's anything flowing through the curved lines. The lines are not pathways. They are not conduits. They are not places. They're not railroad tracks. They're not anything like that. They're created by they're completely incidental to the thing elementally creating them, which is a straight line, radial force, in the mixture of two, the electron force and the proton force. And based on the mixture, it's really just showing you, well, this is blue, and this is when it bends, that means it's getting violet, and then it goes back to being red on the other end. It's just showing you the mixture.
Okay, well, let's go to Wikipedia for the magnetic field, because this obviously has a different and a world science explanation.
I can't read that.
Magnetic field. A magnetic field is a vector field that describes the magnetic influence of electric charges in relative motion and magnetized materials.
Right, and by vector field is essentially pointing out how that's where it starts with Maxwell and Faraday and all that kind of crap, is that it's this straight line force.
The effects of magnetic fields are commonly seen in permanent magnets, which pull on magnetic materials such as iron and attract or repel other magnets. Magnetic fields surround and are created by magnetized material and by moving electric charges, electric currents, such as those used in electromagnets.
Right, but the key thing they're not going to say, because they're stupid, is that the whole source of the magnetic effect is electrons and protons, and they're being in proximity to each other, which means there are dipoles, and when they're far apart they're just charge. So when you take two charges and you bring them close together, you create a dipole, and a dipole is a magnet.
They exert forces on nearby moving electrical charges and torques on nearby magnets.
And again, so they could also just point out that every magnet you have interaction with isn't really a magnet, it's made of magnets. So it's like saying, look, I show you a rubber band, and I can say, I can explain what rubber bands do by just saying there's a bunch of rubber bands in the rubber band. That's why it stretches. Now clearly there's some point I have to explain what the rubber band, the little rubber bands are, but you could understand that a bunch of little rubber bands could make something elastic, you know. And but the real key is I haven't explained anything. So big magnets aren't an illustration of elemental function. They're a description of what emerges when you have rubber bands. Now you explain what a rubber band is, and you say, well, a rubber band is an atom with an electron and a proton. And that atom is essentially the first little magnet. And you put a bunch of little magnets together, all lined up in the same direction, and their force, their effect, just amplifies. They just add. This one's shooting red out of this end. Then you put two of them together, they shoot twice as much red out of the end. You put three of them together, 3 times as much red out of one end and blue out of the other end. So if you orient them all the same way, you don't mix the color. All the red goes one way, all the blue goes the other way. Now if I turn them different ways, the little rubber bands, well then I lose the effect, because now the little dipoles, now the red and the blue are going to mix. This one shoots blue this way, this one shoots red this way. That means the two are mixing in the atmosphere. They're not mixing physically, they're mixing incidentally as a consequence of being, their vectors are diverging into each other, converging into each other.
In addition, a magnetic field that varies with location exerts a force on magnetic materials.
Now, the charge exerts the force. Now, the force is a reflection, as pointed out. So it doesn't make the energy, it just reflects the field. And all it does is reflect the field differentially. So the electron is a mirror to the red force hitting it, it reflects it. If the blue force hits it, it diverts it. Some other dimension, it shoots back out of the 3 dimensions, the other 2 dimensions. And the other 2 are always perpendicular to the one you're moving in. So if I'm moving in one direction, the other 2 dimensions are the perpendiculars. It just happens that way. So no matter which way I go, the other 2 just become perpendicular.
Both the strength and direction of a magnetic field vary with location. As such, it is described mathematically as a vector field.
Well, again, Maxwell explicitly drew charge. Charge is where it starts. Charge explains what a dipole is made out of. 2 opposite charges, essentially. You can't really look at it any other way. I mean, they know the electron and the proton are fundamentally different, and their fundamental difference is their charge. So why not just accept that a magnet's made out of a dipole of charge? Clearly. I shouldn't get argument from anyone on this planet for that simple point. And in spite of Maxwell saying there's no such thing as a monopole, clearly there are. Clearly.
Okay. Well, we've seen the theory picture of it, and if we have a look at this horseshoe
So obviously that really wasn't the theory, that was just the premise to the theory. They haven't even gotten started in attempting to explain all their hoop-de-doo virtual photon bullshit.
Now over here we'll see that by using iron filings we can see the exact shape of the field.
So you see the exact shape of what happens when you mix 2 fields, the proton field and the electron field. It's a dipole. You're mixing 2 different things, reflections off of an electron, the reflections off of protons. You're mixing those 2 things, and those 2 things don't interact with each other because they're made out of force, and there couldn't be any consequence to the interaction, so it never takes place. And even if it took place, you wouldn't tell the difference in the universe, because this is the same as missing. Okay, 2 things hit each other, same outcome. 2 things miss each other, same universal outcome. So it just can't matter. But anyway, what matters is when you put matter in there, because matter can do the interpreting, and it can interpret one thing as a reflection and the other thing as a diversion. and that's when the universe changes.
Well, that would be because it's iron filings, and they're pretty bad for showing the field, but we will come to that. So, okay. Has anybody done it?
Exactly. So if you want to see the field, then you take an electron. You take a monopole, and you move a monopole through the field. And then you'll see what the field is really doing, in the sense that you can see the attraction for the proton in by the electron, or you can see the repulsion. Well, yeah, it still won't show you the one. It still won't show you that there's two fields. I mean, you just can't. The magnet's really good at that, in the sense that it lines up based on the two fields it's reading. It feels more intensity of red at one end and more intensity of blue at the other end. It's basically showing you that by lining up exactly opposite.
History.
Well, history's boring, it's stupid, useless.
One of the first drawings of the magnetic field by René Descartes in 1644, showing the Earth's attracting lodestones. Lodestones are rocks that are...
Well, yeah, obviously not a great place. It's going back a little bit too far. Obviously he'd get some of it right, but not all of it right. And clearly he's not going to understand the actual forces. You have to go to the forces. Fields are made of forces. You have to explain what forces are in a field if you want to explain a field.
Naturally magnetic. It illustrates this theory that...
And the forces that are in the field are a consequence of what's material that's in the field. The material is going to reflect the forces differently, the electron and the proton, and therefore the field is going to change because of that reflections.
Magnetism was caused by the circulation of tiny helical particles, threaded parts, through threaded pores in magnets, which sounds silly, but considering that's one of the first drawings of the magnet...
Yes, it's silly, but it's only silly in the context of, holy shit, I don't even know how he even drew anything back then, because, you know, a pencil was $500. So, yeah, give the guy credit. Yes, a terrible primitive environment, no light bulbs, nothing. I mean, yes, amazing that people could even do any rational thinking, or attempts at rational thinking. So yes, no discredit to him, but why go back and look at when we were retards and say, gee, I was pretty good. I didn't, I stopped wetting my pants when I was, 14. I was pretty good. Well, I might have been 11. Anyway.
Magnetic field by René Descartes. Let's go check him out and see what he knows about magnetic fields when they were first drawn. Okay.
I was actually joking. I mean, I stopped wetting my pants when I was like 9.
Descartes was a philosopher, mathematician, and he was a scientist. Descartes is also widely regarded as one of the founders of...
Alright, well, I think I'll just skip this history, right? He's not proving anything with this history crap, so let's see if we can get past history, because history is really not very interesting. I mean, pointing out where they made mistakes is fine. Going through the history and saying, well, look, Einstein just invented this stupid concept, space-time, nobody really thought about, nobody understood what he was talking about. And they all just kind of fell into it because Eddington helped, and and little circumstantial things, and it just happened as a consequence of. But really, when you think about it, it's just silly talking about bending something that doesn't exist, and even Einstein admits it's a fucking ether. So why they play that stupid game in the first place?
Himself in a room with an oven, probably a stove, to escape the cold. While within, he had 3 dreams and believed that a divine...
Alright, so we don't need this history lesson. Just not useful.
It shows the magnetic field of the Earth D, attracting several round lodestones.
Right, we already did Descartes. I mean, holy fuck. He's going to, harp on that for 15 minutes. What a waste of time.
Bar magnet to atoms and the Earth. So it covers everything. So, if this magnetic field is incorrect...
Well, again, if you go to the Faraday types and the rest of them and go to their elemental drawings, their simplest ones, they're straight line vectors, and you're talking about lines of intersection, the force travels, the math describes. If you were to draw what the math is saying make a bunch of lines, All right, and then just talk about how the lines intersect. How many lines did you intersect? If the lines are close together, and the further away you go, the less lines you're capable of intersecting because they're diverging, so you're changing those angles. So there's only the ones that are straight eventually. If I go far enough away, the only line that can hit me is the straight line. Every other line will miss. But the closer I get, the more lines I intersect, the stronger the force is. That's where it starts. That's factually correct. That's completely consistent with everything I am saying to you is the truth. That's the way the force behaves. It's a straight line force that emanates from the objects. And clearly what I'm telling you is it doesn't emanate because it creates the energy. It emanates because the field is pushing energy in, and it's just pushing the energy back out again. It's just taking whatever comes into it and it's giving it back eventually. Sometimes it keeps it for a little while and gets hot. Like gravity heats the earth.
I'm going to show something quite different.
Yes, well, you're just wasted so much time that who could care less?
There we go. Now, what are magnets made from? Before I let the cat out of the bag.
Who cares? So again, we know the elemental thing is that you have to have something, you have to have an atom that's intrinsically polar.
Let's just go with neodymium magnets are made from neodymium, iron and boron. And these are all kind of types of metals. I'm not 100% sure about boron. My search wouldn't bring anything back apart from they put it in food, which was really bizarre. So, but I saw it earlier, and I'm pretty sure they're all kind of metals. So these are man-made.
I think the boron is just a ceramic, helps keep the thing in one piece.
Magnets are made from metals. Now, lodestones, on the other hand, these are rocks. A lodestone is a naturally magnetized piece of the mineral magnetite, which is this. And this also is a rock mineral. They are naturally occurring magnets which can attract iron. The properties of magnetism was first discovered in antiquity.
Right, and it's naturally occurring, but again, it requires the alignment thing is still a thing, okay, in the sense of the geometry of the atoms. So you can probably destroy the magnetism by breaking the crystals into little tinier crystals, and then moving them around in different orientations, and then the magnetism is again randomized and therefore of no effect to the environment because it's no longer can you see the blue and the red, you just see the purple.
Through lodestone. So things like Stonehenge are lodestones. Magnetic rocks. That's going to come important.
I don't think it's going to be at all important. I don't think Stonehenge is made out of natural lodestone, so I think that whole thing is a pile of crap. So again, what's the point? I mean, what are you, ancient astronaut theory? So proving God is real by proving there's ancient astronauts who told primitive men how to dig up giant magnets that don't exist. I mean, I've never even heard that Stonehenge has any magnetic relevance, that somehow it's oriented some special magnetic way.
In a bit. Okay, so we have the world's view on what a magnet field looks like, and it looks like...
Well, anyway, you gave the most primitively childish, silliest, not scientific view, so you really didn't delve into any of their theory, which is the virtual photon theory, and you just kind of ignored that. So bad on you. This is not a paraphrase of their theory.
Like this. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to show you how we view magnetic fields these days, and have been viewing permanent magnet fields for the past 10 years.
Right, and so he's going to show the gimmick using a device that is it amplifies, it magnifies, but it distorts. So the view you're going to get isn't the real view. So it's like there's likely other examples where you can use something to attempt to magnify or amplify, and you get a lot of distortion with that amplification. So that's what you're getting here, is a huge amount of distortion from what's really happening.
By using what's known as a ferrocell. Please excuse the yellow squares. Those are to cover my face, because I don't need anybody coming around my house.
Okay,
Pussy.
quick tutorial, because nobody uses iron filings anymore because they're rubbish.
Well, again, there clearly aren't, and making things much more, much smaller just means that I can confuse you better. So if I make a deck of cards really small, it's more likely that I can fool you with a magic trick, right? Because there's less way for you to follow along. And that's all this is a trick.
And they don't show the field. So I'm going to show you the 10-year-old technology for being able to see a magnetic field and see real occurrences rather than...
So again, he's saying it's real when clearly if you look under a microscope at the actual ferrous material, you'll see it's not making any curved lines. It's not doing any of that horse shit. It's just not doing it.
a pile of iron filings that don't do anything. Alright, here we go. So,
They clearly do something. So again, more nonsense. But look how small his reflection was in the glass, and he's worried about it. Oh, somebody will identify me by that little tiny reflection.
the two pieces of glass, exactly the same size.
I'm more likely to recognize your pedicure, or whatever you call that.
Make sure they're clean.
Little polished fingernails and such.
I've not touched the insides of these, I've just cleaned them and put them together. I'm going to open that up, like so, one half there and one half there. And we're going to be using...
See, this is like the waste of time kind of part again. If you wanted to make an instruction video on how to make a ferrocell, then why didn't you just do that instead?
ferro fluid. This is 60cc water
Yeah, so it probably costs you like $20. This stuff's not cheap.
base fluid. Basically iron nanoparticles in a suspension fluid. I've never
Iron oxide.
used that one before. I have a load pre-mixed. Hopefully it'll work because it's about 8.
Just diluted, essentially. So all you do is dilute it with a very thin oil for the purpose of allowing it to be more mobile.
18 months old since I last picked these up, so I know it'll work. I just don't know if it'll work really well. Okay, so you would take your 60cc ferro fluid, and to it, in a 50-50 mix, you would add either WD-40 or baby oil, mineral oil.
Yes, almost any oil will do, but the thinner the oil, the better, essentially. Because you're attempting to liquefy, give the little ferro bits as much mobility as possible. So you're trying to create a fluid that allows them to move freely. You're just lubricating them, right? So it's all just a lubricant.
But you have to thin it out so you can see through it. Because
No, that's not why. It's not to see through it. It's to give it a medium to move through.
this is way too dark. Okay.
It's way too thick. It has way too many little pieces of iron oxide in it.
Good thoughts. Right. Seems a bit thick. It's probably not going to work. We'll have to make this video again.
Yeah, it says really it is like I said, you should just.
Got the piece of glass.
This is false advertisement. This will not prove anything.
Squidge out. Stuff ready, which I did not.
And the thicker the glass, the better in terms of
What
creating
you then do
the.
is you want to get all the bubbles.
You get more eccentric, more distortion, three-dimensionality by having thicker glass. So the thicker the glass is, the more wooey the lines get because of the refraction, the changes in angle through the thicker glass. You have a greater amount of... See, glass reflects going in and then it reflects coming out, so you have more of the wrong direction. The thicker the glass is, light travels the wrong direction for a longer amount of time. Even though it goes back to the right parallel angle, it'll be further off parallel. The distance between the refractions will be greater the thicker the glass. So the more distortion you get. Again, this is a distorto cell.
Out and squeeze it out as much as you can. So I'm putting pressure on the glass. Shimmy it around. And basically,
the thinner the glass, the better. So that's good in terms of, yes, you'll take away the wooiness. Optical flats for true ferrocells are 6 to 8 millimeters thick. That's really thick glass. My glass here is 3 millimeters, which is not thin glass. 3 millimeters is thick glass. So he says the thinner the better, and yet he uses a thick piece of glass. Amazing. So I'm closer to the field and see more. No, well anyway. Some glass I used is 6 millimeters thick. I went down to 3. He doesn't explain why.
trying to force everything out of there. A couple of magnets.
So I just gave you the explanation, right? The thicker the glass, the more unreal the position you're seeing the object at. The more, just like a fish in water, the further deeper the fish is, the more distorted your view of the fish, the more off it is.
I'm going to go out. Normally you can squeeze them out with a magnet. But there we go. It's a bit rubbish because it's got holes in. But that's how you make a ferrocell.
Yeah, it's got air bubbles in it, right? You have to push those out. Well, you have to make sure you don't get them, really, because you have to vibrate them out or something, I guess. You know, with thick pieces of glass, it's a little hard to get the air bubbles out, so you'd have to make them migrate out. Oops.
Now we're going to use it.
Yes, you should have just got to the using part. If somebody wants to know how to make a ferrocell, there's how to make a
This is
ferrocell
called a light
videos.
box. Very simple to make. It's literally
So just understand, every single LED is a light source, and every single LED just creates one curved line. So wherever the curved lines are, it's because the light from one LED is reflecting back to you at these different angles. And the stuff is clearly just in radial lines coming from where you put the magnet, the radial lines of force that the iron filings are going to line up on, and you're just seeing reflections from the different angles. So to get the light to you from here, the you know, it has to be at a certain angle. So it just means that the angle is the thing that's changing based on how it gets to your eye from this source. So this source can only produce, it has to hit the little piece of material over here, it has to hit the little piece of material over here to get to your eye. Can't get there any other way. But they're different lines, so the image you're seeing, the line you're seeing, is from different lines of ferrous material lining up in straight lines.
a piece of wood. I've got a piece of black card in the bottom.
So in this case, the iron filings give you the true picture, because the iron filings will just basically all line up. And the reason why there's lines of iron filings is, as I explained, each line becomes its own magnet with a plus end and a minus end, a north end and a south end. And they repel each other because they're all oriented the same. It's that simple. That's the truth that all these idiots ought to start with, because that's the physical truth. That's what you'll see under a microscope. I did it. I videoed it. I showed it to you.
Light colours, but it's basically a box with a hole in the top. LEDs in strips. Plug this in.
Individual sources of light, so that's the key to it. If you have a consistent source of light from all directions, no ferro cell function. You have to have individual point sources of light. Planck. Yeah, there you finally
That's
plugged
light
it in.
box. And this, we go over that. Unfortunately, though, this is just one of my easy ones. That's just how you make one. So I'll plug in my prototype box.
So this proof really didn't need the how-to part, right? Right. He's proving something in capital letters. This isn't part of the proof. How to make the proving device. How to make your divining rod really doesn't have anything to do with you saying, I found gold with my divining rod. It's just not the same thing. Look at the approval of this video. 32-1 for God crap smeared on science. Horrifying.
Well, this is the prototype box that I built that has in it a rotating platform.
Right, and it's rotating for no good reason except to make it look more wooey, to add more distortion. Here, I'll move the field so fast that you can't really follow along anyway, and everything's moving. It's wooey. It's just a ruicoling. It's just wooicoling.
Solar light to power it, but these LEDs will power it. I have this in the middle.
So more just distortion, right? Do this to create individual light sources again. So you're taking light sources that are individual and you're turning them on and off to wooify the image. Clearly not as clean a device
Now remember, most of you have never
as what we would call a microscope. Clearly not intended to show you the truth. I mean, you don't show the truth with jagged lines, right? Crooked lines don't make truth. Straight lines make truth.
ever seen this? Not ever. So, what I'm going to do to show.
Yeah, so of course I haven't seen this because I haven't bothered going to the Woo show. I mean, you know, frankly, we probably have seen this. So that's sort of wrong to say because all the little wooey simulations, different things that they come up with, you know, they're all in this nature. I mean, Nova has probably used woo devices.
That's some of the light. Let's do that. So I invented a zeotrope magnetic viewer.
Right.
And that means I've reverse engineered it so that instead.
So he's rotating the magnets, he's turning the light sources on and off, except for some of them, the select ones, and that's about all we have here.
Of you seeing the magnetic field rotate, I move the light so that you can see the magnetic field rotate.
So he's showing it vibrating and doing things, and all of that's created as an illusion, as an emergent property of all this other crap that's in your microscope. So he's essentially taking a what do you call the magnifying glass, and he's just clearly right in our faces showing us, look, I can wobble it, I can do things to it to make the image look like it's moving, and it looks like it's active, look like there's a real moving field.
Let's get this sort of centered.
Yeah, you suck at centering. Not quite still. You're processing. So as the magnets rotate, clearly the little bits of ferrous material, if you could see them, they're all shifting their position. But they're all shifting their position in essentially lines, and the lines are going to be based on the fact that he's got more than one magnet means that he is creating some curved lines out of the ferrous material, some curved magnets, because the magnets can bend. Obviously, if I have a bendable magnet, you could understand that I could put it near a strong magnet and one side will bend towards it and the other side will bend away from it, you know, causing that magnet to bend. So obviously the field lines that the ferrous material lines up on can bend when you have more than one source of magnetism. So he's putting more than one source of magnetism, more than one source of light, just things to complicate the mixture instead of making it simple so we could understand what is actually happening. Correct and working, permanent magnet fields don't rotate. Yes, exactly. So why are you rotating them? Unless energy is induced. Well, even then, by making the light rotate, I make the field seem like it's moving. Yes, exactly. So he puts in little text here, I'm not really showing you the truth. I'm showing you a complete manufactured pile of crap.
You get to see magnetic field and how it moves.
Alright, it's really pretty sucky. It's not as even good as his other videos that demonstrate something. So this proving God is real, and there really isn't any proof. And so it's really a whole pile of horse shit. You're more than halfway through the video. You haven't even got into any of this proof. Just an incredible waste of capital letters. Yes, you should get a waste of capital letters ticket from the authorities. Anyway, too boring. Stupid. Irrelevant. Not to any scientific minds. It's going to be, should be repugnant to any scientific type mind. Should say this is not the way to prove something. Alright, so till the next time and such.